And welcome back to another Perspectives. And that opening citation that was before the video was an extract for something that I'd written last year in 2022. I'll put the essay below. It's called The Hidden Forces of Life, Part 2, Techne Terraforming. And recently I just had a quartet discussion where we mentioned about the issue of terraforming, and I can put the link to that preview video below as well. So the theme of terraforming had been on my mind, and I was reminded of what I'd written, because there's terraforming and there's technology, and then there's a term called techne. And first off, I wanted to say that I approached the term techne as a way of seeing this terraforming that's going on across the planet. Now, we know, of course, that the technological infrastructure is changing the architecture that humans move through on the planet. But it's not just the environment and the architecture, but primarily it's the whole form of human behavior. And techne, the word of Greek origins, techne, refers to not just the form of technology, but what that changes around it. That is the human behavior, the skill sets, and the whole form of being, which is shifted by technology. So, for an example, a simple one, we all use maybe spell check when we're on the computer, when we're in the word processor. Well, you know, spell check has obviously changed how we think about or focus on the grammar or spelling, because in many ways we get used to the fact that this spell checker auto corrects what we're writing. So we often just let it go, and we perhaps don't feel the need to be trained so much in grammar, especially I think the younger generations. And also, for example, Twitter is a case in point, or should I say X, in that it's changed the behavior of how people communicated, because instead of writing in full sentences, they had to abbreviate and create all these abbreviated letters and expressions in order to fit in with the limitations of how many words. And in many ways, with social media messaging, I get messages from people where they just use letters to represent words from their sounds, which kind of annoys me. I prefer full sentences. But it's changed the way we behave and interact. So techne is a kind of, what I think is a kind of terraforming motif, because when we have a new engagement with something external to us, in this case new forms of technology, then actually it alters our behavior and skill sets and changes what may be expected from people's behavior in the future, or molds human behavior according to the style of technology. So techne is the whole encompassing kind of environment that grows around and then often gets set into a pattern or groove according to the type of technology which is used. And recently, when I had that quartet talk, I started off by saying, well, the term terraforming, and terraforming, for those not familiar with it, the word explains or describes how a planet is adapted, is formed to a certain way of life. So if through space exploration, and this is often used in Star Trek, you come to a planet and you want to adapt it to a certain way of life, or watch it being adapted, then you form the terra, you form the land. So the planet Earth has not really been terraformed by humans in the past. The humans adapted to the planet. And now, of course, with the onset of advanced technologies, of course, there's more advanced technologies out there, or not out there, under the radar, But technologies are now, for the first time, I think, have the capacity to alter our environment, whether consciously or unconsciously, whether deliberately or nefariously. So it creates a different environment which may be less or more amenable to humans. But when I first approached that term, I was thinking that, well, it can be physically and it can be non-physically. You can have a terraforming in terms of a frequency vibrational shift, whereby a person can be more aligned or in sync or in resonance with their vibratory environment, or more out of sync. It depends what environment it is. So, I think we've all had the experience where we've entered a gathering, a party, an event, and we think, I don't feel like I fit in here. I don't like the vibe, and that's because we are not in sync or in resonance with the vibrational frequency environment. So either you can leave or you can do something to change the environment. That's why when we, let's say, organize an event, we think about which people to invite to, and which events and which proceedings to put on in order to create the right environment and the right frequency environment. And so we have a frequency environment which we can try to adapt, or we adapt to it depending on what forces are involved. But in Techne, we may be more unconsciously being changed to the patterns that are being set up by the technology. And I'm reminded actually of a poem which came out in, I think, 1987. It was published by an English poet called Heathcote Williams. He's not very well known these days, but in the 80s he was quite well known for writing these long epic poems. In fact, the poems were books. And he wrote a very interesting one which it was well known in its time, called AUTOGEDDON. And he was writing about how the influence of the auto car, the motor car, had changed the environment on the earth, almost a terraforming by the car. And there's a very well-known extract from this poem AUTOGEDDON. So I'll just read it here. He says, "If an alien was to hover a few hundred yards above the planet, it could be forgiven for thinking that cars were the dominant life form, and that human beings were a kind of ambulatory fuel cell, injected when the car wished to move off and ejected when they were spent." I'll put a link below to the full poem, which you can find online now. That's an interesting kind of observation. If a passing alien was to have a look down on Earth, they would think that the dominant life form on Earth was the car, because it was just all over the place, and that these things called humans that entered the car were just a fuel cell. When they got in, the car would go, and when they got out, the car would stop, as if there was just a fuel cell. And I think that's an interesting observation and analogy. We can say a similar thing today, but instead of if an alien was passing and looking down on Earth, rather than seeing just the car, I think that's been replaced by a kind of technological ecosystem. And so we have this hardware of ecosystem with all, of course, the infrastructure that whatever it's satellites in low Earth orbit. We have the masts, antennae across the planet. We have, these antennae and masts, whether they're 5G or whether they're other transmitters, they're all across the planet. Of course, we had cables, but cables are now being replaced. So that's the hardware. And of course, the software, we have this very highly permeated electromagnetic environment. So it would seem that actually the dominant life force was a kind of technological being or technological ecosystem. And of course, the dominant kind of, let's say, fuel for that would be electricity, which dominates at the moment most kind of electro energy, which is interesting because the human body, by comparison, is really a light being, because not only do organic life on Earth rely and depend upon the sun, which is the natural light being generated in our solar cosmic environment, but the sun is responsible for sustaining life on the Earth. And of course we know, or from biophysics, we've learned or come to understand that our cellular body and the DNA and all our cells emit biophotons, and that we are a kind of plasma being that has a collective field of biophotonic light, which is going back to a kind of natural light in terms of the constitution of elements. Whereas electricity is produced, and it's a kind of, well, according to Rudolf Steiner, electricity is sublight, a lower form of light. So you get you get one type of species on this planet, which is, you could say, the indigenous species, or indigenous from a certain time frame on this planet, that is fueled by cosmic solar light and radiation, and the vessel that is used to be mobile on this planet also operates through this type of plasma biophotonic light, biologically synchronized light. But of course now it looks like a new terraform is coming in place, whereby it seems the planet is now more amenable to a different life form, a life form which can move around the technological ecosystem and all the technological apparatus, and is fueled mainly by sublight. Of course, sublight, electricity, is a form of vibration, as all things are, and I wonder how we would see a difference if we measured the vibration of electricity as opposed to the vibration of natural sunlight. I'm sure it's been done, I haven't looked it up, but you see, everything is a matter of frequency. And so whilst there's Techne Terraforming going on, which is changing our behavior patterns, how we communicate. We're communicating now online a lot more than we were physically. This is part of Techne. It's changing our everyday patterns of behavior. And so what we're seeing here, of course, is a change in which frequencies may become more dominant. So if you're going to create an electrified environment, which is more conducive to a lower density frequency to inhabit that, then part of that Techne would be to adjust the frequency environment. And I think we can say that perhaps maybe going on now with this, proliferation of lower density emanations through dross entertainment, the totally manipulated media, and the entertainment industry, the culture industries like movies, films, the music industry. What's being put out by these industries are lower frequency emanations. And we can see that by looking at, if we just played a song from today, which is so-called popular and modern, which comes with its video attached to it, which is also frequency. And then if we sat beside some music from a few hundred years ago, whether it's classical music, and would notice the difference in frequency. And I'm not being a Luddite here saying, well, the music of the past is much better than the music of today. That's a subjective opinion based on our own conditioning. But I say, in terms of frequency, I'm sure that we would be able to discern and detect a different frequency with different consequences based on the music emanations of today, and the way the music's recorded, and the musical scale which is attuned to according to the frequency of past music. So it seems that the content of this ecosystem is being put out, being created, established and disseminated, which is more aligned or in sync with a certain frequency or Techne Terraforming environment. So many people are finding this uncomfortable because their own frequency is not aligned with this terraformed environment. So I think, so the question in here, of course, is not only a question of how we operate through our hardware environment, how we use our devices rather than the devices using us, how we use the tools of our environment to operate primarily from a human organic point of place, but also which frequencies are more dominant in our environment, in our home, which frequencies are more dominant by the music we allow into our homes, the media, the internet and the technologies, the Wi-Fi, how we use them and allow them into our home, but also importantly our own thoughts and thinking patterns, because what we think and feel and say, they're also thought forms and word forms which have their own frequency. So how we create our living environment is also a form of techne and terraforming. So we can terraform and re-terraform, take back our environment by choosing how we wish to terraform it through the frequencies. And then of course our own techne, our own form of behavior would then kind of reflect that. So how we set up our environment would then also influence how we move through it and our behavior and how we set our daily kind of patterns. So we get this Techne Terraforming going on the global level through hardware and through also the frequency, which may be called the software. And then we have the choice to also set up and terraform our own localized immediate environment, and also with the relations and relationships we have with our technological environment, our physical environment, our friendships and our human environment. All this creates a techne and a frequency terraformed environment. So it's I think it's the concept of techne and terraforming is complex and multi-layered, but the main point is that we can also participate in forming and reforming our physical, emotional, mental and vibrational environments in our local space. So just thought I would put that out as a thought that just crossed my radar, but it's been in my thoughts for a while. It's just risen to the top today. So as always, thanks for bearing with me, and I hope these thoughts have resonated with you, and may you go well in forming your own environment and resonating to what works best for you. In all ways, stay sane, stay healthy, and stay grounded. Until next time, cheers.